All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. Welcome. This is going to be Lee Didicandid. Is that pronounced properly?
Don't worry about it, but
I tried.
it's fine. Phonetically, I don't know why I think my dad messed up spelling my last name, but it's okay.
Awesome. And Jacob Hernandez as well.
That's easier.
There you go. And I've been looking forward to this. This is going to be talking about Chevron getting automation to speed up their FinOps adoption. And yeah, we're going to have an interactive session. So now I don't get to sit down through this session. I'm going to be running around with a microphone.
So yeah, we're going to try to make you work today and get your steps.
This is going to be hard. Over
Ben,
you guys.
you got to keep your phone on you so we count these steps.
Count
right,
the
I've
steps,
got to keep the step count going. Okay, right.
I'm trying to help you. Hey, cool guys. I'll go to the next slide. Just introduce ourselves. Jacob, you want to go first, buddy?
Yeah, sure. Jacob Hernandez. I'm not a cloud migration analyst anymore.
You got promoted?
Once upon a time. You can call it promoted.
Scott did not tell me that.
Well, I think this is from LinkedIn, and I'm sorry again if you've been looking at my LinkedIn. I haven't updated it in like 5 years. So sorry for that. Also, sorry if you were expecting Scott.
I was expecting Scott because we're talking about this
right? So if you don't know, Scott was pretty much the founder of FinOps at Chevron, and I came in a little bit after him when he set up the FinOps team at Chevron. But I'm a cloud engineer on his team and doing a lot of work with the optimization and modernization.
Then initially, me and Scott were supposed to do this session, but I think his wife wouldn't let him ditch him for her birthday party out in Laguna. So fortunately, we have the best of the breed right here. My name is Lee Didicandid. Run head of strategy and go to market for the Turbonomic practice. And also, but historically my background is all performance engineering. I was doing this for data centers for some of the big tech companies in the world and stuff like that. Then what happened over the last couple of years, everyone moved to cloud. So same thing, same concepts apply, but we could tell you about it. We also built a similar algorithm twice at other companies. So it's interesting that what Turbonomic does, but I'll let Jacob tell the story from there. Okay. And guys, the one big thing in this one, I know we have slides and I don't want to, you guys have been bored with a bunch of slides already, so ask away and any questions you guys want. We'll probably take 2 to 3 questions on every slide and we can go from there, and then Jacob's going to describe mainly about what we did at Chevron together.
Yeah.
Okay.
No questions on gas prices. I don't set those, so can't answer those either.
Cool. You want to talk about what was some of the business drivers that you guys wanted to do at Chevron, brought you there and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much our journey started about 6 to 7 years ago. Our higher level management saw the benefit in moving towards the cloud for both eventual cost savings, and at the time, our infrastructure that we were hosting in several data centers throughout the US and the world were aging, and it was going to be about that time where we were going to have to start investing a lot of money either into rehosting our own infrastructure and building new data centers or moving into the cloud. And that's kind of what started the push into cloud. Shortly after that, I don't know if many of you recall, but there was a downturn in the price of oil. And you can say that really sped up our migration into the cloud. And at that time, everyone was at least in the oil and gas industry, was looking for ways to cut costs, looking for opportunities to save money because the profit margins were no longer there. We had gone pretty much in a matter of a week or two, well, it seemed like a week or two, but from $100 barrel of oil to maybe 40 to 60. And a lot of our prospects at the time were looking in the deep water, and these projects that take billions of dollars to kind of generate that revenue, and that was not going to be sustainable anymore with the operating model that we're in. So that kind of is what drove a lot of that migration to the cloud, and the reason that we kind of jumped all in right away. In terms of optimizing the cloud costs, that really, unfortunately for us, it was an afterthought. again, at the time when we were kind of moving, the objective was we had signed some agreements and we needed to get out of data centers because we had sold them, and we didn't really care what it costs. It was, we just need to go. Go now, go as fast as you can. Not a lot of thought into the cost because they didn't expect us to blow away the budget of what they thought what they thought the cloud span was going to be, right?
So are you guys still in data centers today, or are you guys primarily like?
We probably will be for a long time.
Okay.
We do have a few, and that's mostly because of the business that we're in and the countries that we operate in. We have a lot of business units that are in countries that require the data stay in country, stay local to there, and some of the governments, a lot of the joint ventures too that we're in, they want control of that data, and they want control of the hardware that hosts the data.
It's like the typical story, like most of the data that you
Yeah.
keep on-prem and other workloads you move to the cloud.
Yeah. So as much as you can, we're trying to get everything that can go to the cloud
As much as
there,
possible.
but it's not possible everywhere yet.
Cool. Next slide. Oops. So could you walk us, I think this is where probably a lot of questions are going to come up. Like, could you walk us through like your FinOps journey at Chevron, like when you first started and how you're working with like the engineering teams and stuff like that? Then how did you accelerate like your practice as you've been doing this? Because you guys have been doing this for how long now? Like 2.5, 3 years now?
So this is kind of when it goes back to Scott. Scott kind of started the FinOps movement in Chevron about 3 years ago, and it really was just him. It was Scott, and he kind of pitched the idea to upper management. He got a couple of our key cloud architects involved, and because, like I said before, the goal was just to get into cloud, and it didn't really work in terms of managing the financial aspects of it. So year one was just getting into cloud. Year two is like, hey, we need to take a step back. There's no way for us to build back. There's no way for us to understand, at least the business units to understand how much cost they're incurring in cloud, right? So when it started, we'll say 3 years ago, we had to, Scott and a couple of the cloud architects, they had to rework the whole design. We're an Azure shop. The whole design of how the billing, the subscription model, how we're going down to the actual resource level, and how that bills back to the project, the product line, and then eventually the platform.
Okay, cool. Before we jump into like how we did like the automation bit, I just want to make sure you guys have any questions or.
So I see you guys are on Azure. What type of distinct Arc patterns do you have that comprise the apps that are running? You know, is it IaaS, is it PaaS? And then beyond that, how did you start refactoring to optimize?
Yep, and I've kind of alluded to it a couple of times. Whenever we started that journey, we had the whole big effort, like I'm sure many of you have gone through, right? It was which ones are gonna be refactored, which ones are gonna be rehosted, which ones are just gonna stay behind. And unfortunately for us, and it's what we're dealing with a lot today, most of what transferred over as IaaS. There is, if you're asking me, it's probably maybe like 25% of what we have is actually in what I would consider an optimal and modernized state. The other part of it is still on IaaS, and that's really what we're targeting as like our next big opportunity is what are the going to be the low-hanging fruits to take from IaaS into PaaS or containers or things that are more cloud native, right? But for the for the IaaS solutions that we have, we weren't just going to sit there and just let those incur costs. And that's where a lot of the automation and stuff that we've built that's where a lot of our efforts have kind of focused on today, is managing those IaaS costs, because they're the biggest source of our Azure spend.
Don't worry, buddy. We'll ask you about automation in a bit. Just hold on. Any more other questions? Man in front row.
Thank you. Interesting journey so far. So you talked about cloud optimizations. I was curious to find, did you build your own optimizations, or you relied on native optimizations that Azure provides?
He just went through my question.
He
Might as well
sure
go
did.
there.
Yeah. So we kind of went through all of that, to be honest. In the very early stages, we tried using just what was native to Azure, and it worked. But obviously, it worked for a while, but things grew, and they grew really fast.
So what did you use to get around that after that?
So after that, kind of the next phase was we can develop some in-house stuff. And we had a small team of infrastructure engineers, and we built a couple of Azure pipelines that helped to manage costs on our own. Part of that was in-house built tools that would automatically start up and shut down VMs by default, and it took user intervention to do anything different from that, especially in the dev and test. Most of what I'm talking about, by the way, is focused in dev, test, and sandbox. We're still barely touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to production resources. And then part of that other stuff that we worked on was in-house tools that help manage costs, looking at utilization, right? We knew there was a ton of waste, especially in our sandbox environment. And so we started then to create policies, rules, additional automation in those environments to shut down things that weren't being used. Pretty much everything that you've heard around here, we took a stab at it, internally, in-house developed.
Cool. Any questions before we talk about how we oh, cool.
I just wanted to know if there was a particular reason you selected Azure as the public cloud you migrated into, and in particular, any sort of FinOps or cost optimization reasons you might have selected that over the other options.
They probably gave you a good discount, right? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, short answer is no. The decision was made at a much higher level in the company than what I'm privy to. But in general, Chevron has always kind of been a Microsoft shop, and it just kind of played directly into that in terms of the decision making. And I'm sure the discount didn't hurt either.
Yeah, Scott worked with Microsoft for a while, so just culturally they just stopped at that, I think. Then you can understand other questions from there, other answers. Cool. Any other questions before we jump? How we accelerated the FinOps thing, and that's one thing that Jacob's going to do. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Go.
Okay.
So how do you superpower? Because right now, when I was talking to Scott, about a couple weeks back, you guys are on a different path with FinOps. You guys are running. So, what made your team do that with reporting, some of the tools you picked, and stuff like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff, the groundwork had been laid when the initial team was formed with Scott and the small group of engineers. I think, in one of the other talks, we just happened to have a couple of engineers and then a couple of data whizzes, right, that could work on the reporting for us. And really, that was the early stages of Chevron adopting FinOps, and that was mainly just kind of I've heard a lot is driving that awareness and accountability, and really when we started getting into the self-service automation, much of that was focused around reporting and then the optimization. The reporting, we kind of mostly used Power BI and a lot of the other Microsoft tools, but at least from the actual optimization side, we ended up outgrowing a lot of the tools that we had built in-house. Again, just we continued to grow, and even today we continue to spend massive amounts of money on cloud, right? And the tools that we had built just weren't able to kind of keep up. And that's kind of when we shifted to a little bit more advanced tools in what we were able to find with Turbo. And continuing on that path of acceleration, we are trying to get to a point, and I think I heard JR kind of talk about, he envisions FinOps kind of like a bell curve, and it feels like, at least from my view, that we're kind of beginning to get to that peak of the bell, where we're trying to get to kind of like a fully autonomous state where us that are kind of in the optimization team are more like hands-off and letting the system and the tools and the automation kind of handle everything for us. We're able to do that because we were able to build a lot of that trust, build that visibility and accountability over the last few years, and people are trusting it now. And with the automation that we're kind of gearing towards, we're mostly just kind of maintaining that everything is working and answering any other questions from our users as they come up. Do we still have a long way to go? I definitely think so.
Don't worry, we'll get there. Any questions on like automation, like what he used? Because like I think the big thing, cool. Second question of the day, but keep going.
So you get a reward if you get 3 questions.
Yeah, I'll get one. So you have power management, you have sandbox, resource deletion perhaps, and maybe you're vertically scaling up and down. Are you using VM scale sets? What other distinct forms of automation do you guys have other than power management? I haven't heard much yet. I was just curious. Yeah, please.
So we do use scale sets, mainly in terms of the automation is we are actively auto shutting down the VMs, like I already said. We are using, and not to kind of get into the products a lot, but we are using IWO to do a lot of the dynamic scaling as needed. So a lot of the environment, and this is mainly speaking to the IaaS part, which is a big part of our spend. But we're relying on a lot of that information to auto we call it resizing, auto resize a lot of the VMs, auto resize a lot of the resources, and we have the data to back it up. And that's really the key for us, because we're not just doing it just to save costs. We're not just doing it just because we're trying to meet a bottom line. We're doing it because that's what the data is saying that you're using, right? At least for us in our industry, and especially in the upstream side of our business, they're notorious for kind of overspending, over budgeting for a lot of the going over budget for a lot of projects. A lot of it starts with our exploration and production teams. They have a huge habit of reserving and purchasing the highest level compute resource that you can find, graphics intensive compute resources that you can find, and they'll run them 24 hours a day, 365 if you would let them, right? And so part of that is just kind of to kind of bring that back in and utilizing the data and the automation that we built to help them understand the impact that could potentially have on their projects in terms of savings and that sort of thing.
Cool. I think the last slide, we just want to tie everything in. I know we've been talking. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
To what extent are these?
Wait, this is the people on the website.
So to what extent are these policies imposed by the central FinOps team versus opted into by the different, spoke business units?
So, yeah. So that's
That's a hard question.
yeah, that's a pretty hard question. But for the most part, we are. I will say we are working with the business units to impose them centrally. At least for the better part of this past year, we've mostly been focused on doing a lot of this work in central IT, right? So first, our goal was to kind of control our own costs in central IT. Once we have that model set and ready to go and proven, then our goal is to push it out to the business units. And really, that's where we're going to meet the most resistance, because they never really had that imposed by central IT in the past. And in fact, that's where just recently we got a lot of pushback from one of the business units where we're trying to do a lot of this work, and their response was, all we wanted to do was show them potentially what they could be spending. These were some geoscientists that run some Monte Carlo simulations. All we wanted to do was, before they run their simulation, tell them how much it's going to cost to run that simulation, because you have options, right? You don't have to have it finish the computation in an hour. You could maybe select different compute times, right? All we wanted to do was tell them how much it was going to cost, and right away, their management say, "Whoa, we don't want to know what it costs." Wait, what? That's right. We don't want to know what it costs because we don't want you to inhibit innovation and creativity. And so that's kind of that's more of like a culture thing that kind of we're in an uphill battle fighting against. And it's funny. I was talking with somebody, but that's just kind of how it is in oil and gas right now. When times are kind of good for oil and gas, it's real easy to not worry about how much something costs, right? But as soon as the downturn happens, which it always does because that's the industry, then they're like, oh, how much does this cost again, right? So for us, that's kind of where we're at with that. So ideally, we would just do whatever we want and push it, but because of the way that the business has operated for so many years, we're trying to kind of get everyone to buy in first.
Cool. And I think this last slide is like what we're trying to talk about. It's like, we built the FinOps practice and stuff like that, but now the one thing is like, you still have the same groups, like some groups that really want to work with you and collaborate, like explain the best case where, how you're working with those proper engineering teams with like cost and like they're optimizing. Then I think you alluded a little bit, like the worst case where like, oh, this cost us, you're inhibiting innovation and creativity. Yeah. You do that to me a lot too, so it's fine.
Yeah, so the exciting thing for us is that we are starting to see a lot of that change. We have these dashboards that we've set up to kind of highlight the different costs. People are starting to come to us centrally because somehow or some way the message has gotten out that like, hey, this stuff's going to cost you money. It's going to affect your budget. It's going to reduce your margins. And they're finally starting to come to us. They're starting to ask questions like, well, if we do this, how much is this going to cost? We're starting to get a lot more support tickets asking for consulting from our team. How can we modernize our application? How can we move from IaaS to a container instance? Right? We're looking at this PaaS solution. How do we get there? Right? And that's what's been kind of exciting for us, and that's kind of what makes me think we're starting to get at that top of that bell curve, is because we're no longer having to kind of chase people down. We're finally starting to get people to come to us with those questions.
Yeah, like when talking to Scott and Jacob about this, it's pretty amazing because you got to see like this transition as the FinOps is growing up. Like Scott was one of the original like board members with me on there, so it's interesting to see like how like your practice. Like I think there's still a couple teams that probably don't trust you guys, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, but I think like a good like 90% of them are moving forward and like looking at it. Then what's that little thing that we did this morning, Ben? You know, that little dashboard pixel thing with all the words?
The word cloud.
Yeah.
Word cloud, yeah.
So it was all around like data, transparency, then like the automation that you put in. So it's good. Guys, I know we're wrapping up, so I gave you guys 5 minutes and we answered a bunch of questions, but is there any other questions before we end over? Yeah, I saw you. Trust me. I saw you.
We got 5 minutes until we wrap, so is anybody else on?
Cool. Any other questions? This is open Q&A, so like, is there Q&A side?
Now I got to figure out a reward to give.
Yeah,
because
just
this
keep
is
going.
All right, so how are you guys bringing performance metrics to give the confidence for teams to make the change?
This should be an easy one for you.
I heard a lot about performance, so I'm just interested. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the question again?
It's a performance. So like, you could talk about like the products you use, but like how you're matching performance with optimization, basically.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, again, this kind of goes back to the reporting and the dashboards, and all that is kind of built around our IWO engine and our Park My Cloud engine. But they are, at least it started as more of like a manual, like hand-holding process. From our optimization system that would do the hundreds of recommendations in terms of savings that you could get. We would bring the entire list to the different teams, like, hey, this is what we want to do. We're going to do it this time. Do you have a problem? Most of them at the beginning, they're like, no, don't touch my stuff. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to just do these anyway. We'll just do these ones that are low impact. Okay. And it just started with just the few, right? Building that trust. And now we're at the point where we just send out a massive list. This is everything we're going to do. If you have an objection, we'll do it next time. We won't do it this time. Yeah. And they just approve, disapprove, and then we move forward, right?
Yeah, like the algorithm basically concentrates on like matching like your error and latency, but you could say that's like your performance. Then like, I know like a lot we talk about like, because everyone's spending a lot of money, it scales down, but also we scale up.
Yep.
So if you need the performance for your applications, we're not gonna hold that. So we work on that with them every day, and like they'll give us feedback on like some things to improve, some things we have to change, but it's an iterative approach that we go through for like Chevron and multiple other people that we work with, like Jacob and Scott themselves.
Yeah, and one thing a lot of people are okay with too is that it's not something that's just going to happen all the time, right? There is kind of like a grace period where if you just got resized up or down, we're not going to touch it again for at least another few weeks, right?
Yeah.
It's not just going to be a constant change.
But the other things, we showed the data to them that was like show like over like a P95 over 30 days.
Yeah.
So they can understand like why they scale up or why they scale down. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, the big thing is like we have the data that we're working with the units to understand it. It's like my analogy that I was telling you before. Like if I gave one of you guys a Tesla, would you drive from like Austin to Georgetown on auto drive by itself? Probably not. But if you trust it over months and times and we had reports and data on it, you probably take that chance or turn it on halfway and stuff like that. So it's the same thing of what we're trying to do with like our automation and working with the Chevron team on this. Cool.
All right. Any further questions? Yes.
One question. So we are Walgreens and we are also Microsoft Azure in most cases. The problem we have sometimes is with the application teams for pushing back for power down, power up the applications. And simply because, an application may have 30, 40 VMs and it's just inconvenient, right? It's time consuming. DevOps sometimes are lazy, right? So they don't want to do it. Have you done anything around that to encourage people, or have you done any scripts automation in your case? Can you elaborate a little bit more of how you're encouraging people and how do you make the power scheduling working or the business hours working?
Sure. Yeah. So ideally, and again, this is for sandbox dev and test. If we had it our way, everyone would, all the resources would be only used on demand. There's no real, I mean, it would be powered up as you're using it, powered down when you're done. We don't really have a way to get to that state right now, but what we are doing is we're actually forcing everyone to be always off in terms of the IaaS infrastructure, right? Always off, and if you want to actually use those resources, you have to power it on, and you have to specify how long you actually want it on. So we've gone to that extreme. It sounds extreme, kind of is, where it's always off, and then you say, I want it on for 5 hours. Then it'll be on for 5 hours. After the 5 hours, then it turns off, unless you keep on telling it you want it on longer. Yeah.
Then the other models we've seen is where you integrate into infrastructure as code, you deploy into like dev or stage, watch the P95. Then before you deploy to prod, we done checking it. So there's a bunch of models that work with that and automations from there. Okay, guys, I think that's it.
Lee, Jacob, that was awesome. Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much. Thank you very much, Lee and Jacob.
Thank you.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.